He thought it was just another day in the Kentucky hills. Owen Hayes never expected that the rusted cage hidden among the bushes would change everything. Inside was a baby Mustang barely alive, trembling with fear and weakness. But what happened next defied everything Owen knew about wild horses as he knelt to free the foe. A shadow moved through the trees the mother had been watching all along. Most wild mays would have charged, attacked, defended their young with fury. But Misty did something no one could have predicted. Instead of running away with her foe once freed, she followed Owen home voluntarily, and when danger threatened not just the horses, but Owen himself, Misty's actions would leave an entire town speechless. This is a story about instinct and trust, about the unspoken connection between a man who had lost faith in humanity and a wild horse who made a choice that would save them both. You won't believe what this mother Mustang did to thank the man who saved her baby. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the pines as Owen Hayes adjusted. His camera lens, the hills of Blue River, Kentucky, stretched before him, painted in shades of green and gold. His weathered hands worked with practiced precision, capturing the landscape he'd grown to love after 15 years away. At 43, Owen's face told stories of both joy and heartbreak. The lines around his eyes deepened as he squinted through the viewfinder, focusing on a hawk circling overhead. Photography had become his refuge, a way to connect with the world without getting too close to its people. He lowered his camera and checked his watch, nearly noontime, to head back before the afternoon heat became unbearable. He packed his equipment carefully into his backpack, each movement deliberate and methodical. The silence of these hills was what had drawn him back after his wife's passing 3 years ago. It was a silence that healed, or at least didn't demand anything of him. The path ahead wound through a series of rocky outcroppings that locals called whispering stones. Owen paused, hearing something that didn't belong, a faint sound almost like a cry. He turned his head, listening there. It was again weak, desperate. "Hello?" Owen called out, his voice breaking the stillness. No human response came, just another soft whimper. From somewhere off the trail, Owen hesitated only briefly before stepping into the underbrush, pushing aside branches of mountain laurel. The sound led him deeper into a clearing he'd never noticed before. That's when he saw it. A crude metal cage, rusted and half hidden beneath fallen branches, and inside Owen's breath, caught in his throat, a baby Mustang. The foe couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its light brown coat was matted with dirt, white socks on its front legs, now gray with dust. It lay on its side, its small frame rising and falling with labored breaths around the cage. The ground was disturbed with hoof prints, suggesting a frantic attempt by another horse to free what must be her baby. "What the hell?" Owen whispered. Approaching slowly, the foe's eyes, large and frightened, followed his movement. Owen knelt beside the cage. Its construction was simple but effective, welded metal bars with a padlocked door. Rage built in his chest. Who would do this to a wild creature? And why he examined the lock, it would take tools to break it, and he hadn't brought any with him. "Hey there, little one," Owen said softly, trying to keep his voice calm despite his anger. "I'm going to help you. I'll be right back." The FO made no sound, now just watched him with those huge, fearful eyes. Owen stood memorizing the exact location his truck was parked, about a mile back. He could be there and back in 40 minutes if he hurried. As he turned to leave, a sound froze him in place, a snort, followed by the soft impact of hooves on earth. Owen looked up slowly. There at the edge of the clearing stood a magnificent mare, chestnut coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight, black man flowing over her powerful neck. A white star marked her forehead like a badge. The mother. Owen's muscles tensed instinctively. A wild mare with a trapped foe was one of the most dangerous animals imaginable he'd grown up around. Horses knew their power and protective instincts. One charge from those hooves could kill him, but she didn't charge. She stood perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on Owen with an intensity that made his skin prickle. There was intelligence in that gaze, and something else, something that looked almost like assessment. "I'm not going to hurt your baby," Owen said quietly, knowing the words meant nothing to her but hoping his tone might. The mare's ears flicked forward, listening. She took one step closer, then stopped. Owen backed away slowly. "I'll be back to help, I promise." He maintained eye contact as he retreated, expecting her to rush him at any moment, but she remained still, watching. Only when he reached the tree-line did he turn and hurry back toward his truck, his heart pounding in his chest. 20 minutes later, Owen's old blue pickup bounced along the rugged trail, pushing as close to the clearing as possible. He grabbed his toolbox from behind the seat and a container of water. The mare might be gone now, might have somehow found a way to free her foe herself. Or she might be waiting. Her patience turned to fury. Owen approached the clearing cautiously, bolt cutters in one hand. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The mare was still there, standing guard over the cage. She hadn't left her baby. She turned her head toward him, ears alert. "Okay?" Owen breathed. "Let's try this." He moved forward slowly, every step deliberate. The mare watched, muscles tensed but not charging, when he was about 10 ft from the cage. She snorted and poured the ground once Owen stopped. "I'm just here to help." To his amazement, after several long seconds, the mare took 2 steps back as if giving him permission, keeping one eye on her. Owen approached the cage and knelt beside it. The foe was weaker now, its eyes half closed. He needed to work quickly. "Hang in there, little one," he murmured. Positioning the bolt cutters on the padlock with a forceful squeeze, the lock broke open. Owen removed it and pulled open the cage door, then backed away immediately. The FO didn't move. "Come on," Owen encouraged. But the baby horse seemed too weak to stand. The mare approached. Then, her movements careful, she lowered her head to nudge her baby, nickering softly. The foe tried to rise, front legs wobbling, but collapsed back down. Owen ran a hand through his hair, weighing his options. The foe needed help, veterinary help, and soon. "Your baby needs water and care," he said to the mare, feeling foolish for talking to a wild animal, yet compelled to explain himself anyway. "I can help, but we need to get him to town," making a decision. Owen returned to his truck and grabbed an old blanket. The mare watched his every move but made no aggressive gestures. It was as if she understood his intentions, impossible as that seemed. He approached the cage again. Blanket outstretched. "I'm going to pick up your baby. Please don't kill me." With careful movements, Owen reached into the cage and slid his hands under the foe's body. It was lighter than he expected, dehydrated and malnourished. He lifted it gently, cradling it in the blanket. The foe let out a weak sound of protest, but didn't struggle. Owen backed away, expecting the mare to charge now that he held her baby. Instead, she followed, keeping a consistent distance of about 8 ft between them. "You're full of surprises," Owen told her, walking backward toward his truck. At the vehicle, he carefully laid the foe on the truck bed. Creating a nest with the blanket, he poured some water into his cupped hand and offered it to the foe, who lapped at it weakly. When Owen closed the tailgate and moved to the driver's door, he looked back at the mare, still standing there watching. "I'm taking him to get help," he explained, feeling increasingly ridiculous. "Talking to a horse. Blue River Animal Clinic, about 5 miles west." He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and began to drive slowly down the rough path, checking his rear-view mirror frequently. What he saw there made him hit the brakes. The mare was following the truck. "Impossible," Owen muttered. But there she was, maintaining a steady pace behind him. He continued driving, never exceeding 15 mph every time he checked. The mare was still there, following, not chasing, following. By the time he reached the main road, Owen was shaking his head in disbelief. Surely she would stop now. Wild horses didn't follow vehicles into town. But as he turned onto the paved road toward Blue River, the mare emerged from the tree-line and continued her pursuit, her powerful legs carrying her effortlessly behind the truck. Owen pulled out his phone and dialed with one hand, eyes alternating between the road and his mirror. "Blue River Animal Clinic." A woman's voice answered, "Natalie. It's Owen Hayes. I'm coming in with an emergency. Found a baby Mustang in a cage up in the hills. It's in bad shape." "A Mustang in a cage?" Natalie Wilson's voice sharpened with concern. "That's illegal. Who would? I don't know, but there's more. The mother is following my truck." "What do you mean following?" "I mean, she's running behind me right now, has been. For the last 2 miles. I've never seen anything like it." A pause. "How far out are you?" "About 3 minutes. I'll be ready." Back entrance. Owen hung up and returned his attention to the road, acutely aware of the weakening foe in his truck bed and the determined Mayor keeping pace behind him as he approached the small town of Blue River. Cars slowed, and pedestrians stopped to stare at the unusual sight of a wild Mustang running behind a pickup truck in broad daylight. Owen ignored them, focused only on reaching the clinic. He pulled into the back lot of the Blue River Animal Clinic, where Natalie was already waiting, her expression changing from professional concern to astonishment as she saw the mayor following at a distance. "My God," she breathed as Owen parked and hurried to the truck bed. "The foss fading fast," he said gently. Lifting the blanket, wrapped baby horse dehydrated, maybe starving. Natalie tore her eyes away from the mayor, who had stopped at the edge of the parking lot and focused on the foe in Owen's arms. "Let's get him inside exam room 1. Owen carried the foe through the back door, expecting to hear the sounds of panic as the mayor charged after them instead. When he glanced back, he saw her standing completely still, watching from a distance inside. Natalie worked quickly, inserting an IV line for fluids, while examining the FO male, probably 3 to 4 weeks old. She muttered, her trained hands moving efficiently. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition. How long was he in that cage? No idea. I just found him today while photographing up near Whispering Stones." Natalie shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. "This is deliberate cruelty. I'm calling Sheriff Pierce." Owen nodded, but his attention was drawn to the window. The mayor was still there now, grazing calmly on the patch of grass beside the parking lot, but looking up periodically at the clinic. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" he asked, a wild mare following her for this way, not running off. Natalie joined him at the window. "Never. It defies everything we know about Mustang behavior. She should be miles away by now." The foe began receiving fluids and medication, his breathing gradually becoming more regular. Owen stayed by his side, occasionally glancing out the window to confirm the mayor remained. An hour later, Sheriff Darren Pierce arrived, his tall frame filling the doorway of the exam room. "Got your call. Natalie, what's this about a captured Mustang foe?" Owen explained the discovery, the cage, the rescue, and the mother's unprecedented behavior. The sheriff's expression darkened. "We've had reports of Mustangs disappearing from the southern ranges. Some folks think they're just migrating, but this suggests something more sinister." He pulled out a notepad. "Can you show me exactly where you found this cage?" "Of course." Owen agreed. "But what about the FO and the mother?" Natalie interjected. "The FO needs at least 24 hours of care. He's stabilizing, but still critical." "And the mayor?" the sheriff asked, peering out the window at the chestnut horse still waiting in the clinic yard. Owen felt a strange protectiveness rise in his chest. "I'm not sure, but I don't think she's going anywhere without her baby." The three of them stood in silence, watching the mayor, who had made an impossible choice to trust a human with the life of her foe. None of them could know that this was just the beginning of a story that would change not only Owen's life but the entire town of Blue River. Forever telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Morning. Light spilled through the clinic windows as Owen dozed in an uncomfortable plastic chair. He'd stayed all night unable to leave the FO, who drifted between consciousness and exhausted sleep. Each time the baby Mustang stirred, Owen would lean forward, offering gentle words of encouragement. The sound of the back door opening roused him. Natalie walked in, 2 coffee cups in hand. "You look terrible," she said, offering him one of the cups. Owen accepted gratefully. "Thanks for the compliment. I meant you didn't have to stay all night. I had monitors on him." Owen sipped the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through his tired body. "How is he, Natalie?" "Checked the IV fluids and the FO's vital signs, better still weak, but his hydration levels are improving. The antibiotics seem to be working too." And the mother, Natalie, gestured toward the window. "See for yourself." Owen walked to the window. Coffee in hand, the mayor, he'd started thinking of her as Misty, though he hadn't told anyone, was still there lying in the grass. She'd moved closer to the building overnight. "She hasn't left," he said quietly, "not even to find food or water. I put some hay in a bucket of water near the edge of the lot." She approached after I walked away, watched me the whole time. Owen shook his head. In wonder. "Wild Mustangs don't behave like this." "No," Natalie agreed, "they don't." The clinic door opened again and Sheriff Pierce entered, removing his hat. His weathered face looked grim. "Morning," he said. "How's our patient improving?" Natalie replied, "And the mother still here?" Owen said. The sheriff nodded, then pulled out his notebook. I've been asking around about Mustang disturbances. 3 ranchers on the south side reported seeing trucks without logos driving near the protected ranges at night. No one got plate numbers. Owen Brown, you think someone's trapping them deliberately? Question is why Mustangs are protected. Capturing them is federal offense. Pierce flipped his notebook closed. I'm heading up to check the site where you found the cage. You still able to show me? Owen glanced at the foe. Then at Natalie go, she said. I'll call if anything changes. 30 minutes later. Owen guided the sheriff's vehicle along the rough trails toward Whispering Stones. The morning was warm, promising a scorching afternoon. So, Pierce said, breaking the silence. Heard you've been back in Blue River almost 3 years now, keeping to yourself mostly. Owen gazed out the window. Not much for socializing these days after Caroline. I understand the sheriff's, a voice softened. She was a fine woman, that crash it was no one's fault. Owen tensed. Even after 3 years, hearing his wife's name sent a jolt through him. I appreciate that, Sheriff Darren, the older man corrected. Known you since you were stealing apples from Old Man Miller's orchard. A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. Never could prove that was me, didn't need to. Your pockets were bulging and you were the only kid in town allergic to apples. Face swelled up like a balloon. The tension eased slightly as they continued along the trail. When they reached the clearing, Owen pointed to where the cage had been. The sheriff parked and they both got out right there. Owen said, indicating the flattened grass and disturbed earth. Pierce crouched, examining the area. Dragmark's cage was brought in. Not built here. He stood and scanned the surroundings. Tracks lead that way. 4-wheeler probably. They followed the faint trail through the brush for about 50 yards before it connected with a wider dirt path. This is private property. Owen realized. Lawrence Hudson's land borders the preserve here. Pierce nodded. Hudson's not the friendliest neighbor, but he's never struck me as the type to trap wild horses. Maybe someone's using his land without permission. Possible. Let's pay him a visit. The Hudson estate sat on a hill overlooking the southern valley. A sprawling ranch house with massive windows reflecting the midday sun. 3 black SUVs were parked in the circular drive. Company, Pierce noted, as they pulled up a ranch and approached as they exited. The vehicle, Sheriff. He nodded. Mr. Hudson's in a meeting. This is official business, Pierce replied. Won't take long. The young man hesitated, then led them to the house inside. Voices echoed from a large room to the right. The ranch hand knocked and entered. Sheriff Pierce is here, sir. Says it's official. A moment of silence, then a deep voice replied, Send him in. Owen and Pierce entered a wood-paneled study where 4 men sat around a massive oak table. Lawrence Hudson, a heavy-set man in his 60s, stood at the head. The others remained seated, watching the newcomers with weary eyes. Sheriff, Hudson said, not offering his hand. We're in the middle of something. Sorry to interrupt. Lawrence. Pierce's tone was professional but firm. We're investigating an incident on land bordering yours. Illegal capture of a Mustang foal found in a cage just inside the preserve boundary. Hudson's face revealed nothing. And this concerns me. How 4-wheeler tracks lead from the site to a path on your property. Thought you might have seen something. One of the seated men shifted uncomfortably. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place for rural Kentucky. When was this? Hudson asked. Yesterday. Owen answered. I found the FO while photographing near Whispering Stones. Hudson's eyes narrowed slightly as he registered Owen's presence. Hayes, isn't it Caroline's husband? Owen met his gaze steadily. Yes. Hudson turned back to Pierce. I haven't seen anything unusual, Sheriff, but I have 20. 00 acres, can't monitor all of it. Mind if we check the trail? See where those tracks lead? Actually, I do mind. Hudson replied coolly. You want to search my land? Get a warrant. The suited man cleared his throat. Perhaps we should cooperate, Lawrence. Show there's nothing to hide. Hudson shot him a look before addressing Pierce again. My guests and are discussing a significant business opportunity. If you have questions, call my office tomorrow. Pierce studied Hudson for a moment, then nodded. I'll do that outside. Owen waited until they were back in the sheriff's vehicle before speaking. That was strange. Hudson's always been protective of his property. Pierce said, starting the engine, but yeah, that seemed excessive. Who were those men? The one who spoke looked familiar. Think his name's Norris Randall. Norris, some kind of developer from Louisville. Owen gazed back at the house as they drove away. What would developers want with Mustangs? Nothing good, Pierce replied grimly when they returned. To the clinic, they found Natalie examining the FO, who was now standing on wobbly legs. "Look who decided to join the land of the living," she said, smiling. Owen approached slowly, relief washing over him. The faux comet, he decided, blinked with more alertness than before, his brown eyes no longer clouded with exhaustion. "Hey there, fighter," Owen said softly. He extended his hand and the foe sniffed cautiously before allowing a gentle stroke along his neck. "His blood work looks better," Natalie reported, still underweight, but the fluids and nutrients are helping and miss the mother. Owen caught himself. Natalie raised an eyebrow at the near slip but didn't comment still. They'd been pacing for the last hour. Owen moved to the window. Sure enough, the mare was walking a precise line back and forth, her movements agitated but controlled when she turned, her eyes locked on the building, as if she could see through walls to her baby. "She knows he's improving," Owen murmured. "Horses are intuitive," Natalie agreed. "But this is something else, entirely." The sheriff joined them at the window. "What happens now? He can't stay at the clinic indefinitely." "No," Natalie confirmed. "Once he's stable enough, he needs space, proper care. Wild horses belong in the wild." Pice reminded them. Owen watched as Misty continued her vigilant pacing, but would she take him back? He's still too weak to travel far. "There's the Mustang sanctuary over in Marshall County." Natalie suggested they could take both of them. The thought of sending them away created an unexpected ache in Owen's chest. These horses had crashed into his carefully isolated life, and something about them, about the mother's trust and the foe's resilience, had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried. "I have space," he heard himself say. "My place, 10 acres fence pasture I've been meaning to use." Pierce and Natalie exchanged glances. "You're talking about rehabilitating a wild Mustang and her foe," Natalie said carefully. "That's not a small undertaking, I know." "Horses," Owen replied. "Grew up with them, and my land borders the Eastern Preserve. Once they're ready, they can return to the wild on their own terms." "It's irregular," Pierce said. But given the circumstances, he scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Better than shipping them off to strangers, I could list you as a temporary rehabilitation site, at least until we figure out who trapped the foe and why." Owen looked back at Comet, now nuzzling Natalie's hand as she checked his legs. "When could he be moved?" "Tomorrow if he continues improving," she answered, "but you'll need supplies, proper feed, medications. I'll get everything today." The decision made, Owen felt a strange sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. As he drove to the feed store, he found himself checking his rearview mirror out of habit, as if expecting to see a chestnut mare following behind at Morgan's Feed and Supply. Owen loaded his cart with hay grain supplements and medications from Natalie's list. As he waited at the counter, he overheard 2 men talking in the next aisle. "Hudson's Land Hole South section, for what? Nothing out there but hills and those Mustangs. That's just it, they're clearing it all, resort or something. Big money from Louisville. What about the wild herds? A pauseway, I hear it won't be a problem much longer." Owen stiffened. The cashier called his total and he paid quickly, then hurried to his truck. He needed to talk to Pierce again. The sheriff's office was a small brick building on Main Street. Owen found Pierce at his desk reading through reports. "We may have a problem," Owen said without preamble. He recounted what he'd overheard. Pierce leaned back in his chair. "Rumors Hudson's been threatening to sell for years. Those men at his house were developers, and someone's trapping Mustangs illegally. Correlation isn't causation," Pierce reminded him. "But I'll make some calls. Federal land can't be developed. But if the herds were gone, the land might be reclassified." Owen finished. "Less protection speculation," Pierce cautioned. "Let's focus on what we know. You get your supplies." Owen nodded. "Getting the barn ready this afternoon." "Good, I'll check on the fold tomorrow. And Owen, watch yourself. If there is something going on with those horses, you just stepped right into the middle of it." Owen drove home, his truck loaded with supplies. His property, 10 acres with a small ranch house and weathered barn, had been his grandfather's once he'd renovated the house after moving back, but the barn had remained largely untouched. Now he worked methodically, cleaning stalls, laying fresh bedding, checking water lines. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. By evening, 2 stalls were ready. The feed room stocked as the sun set. Owen sat on his porch steps nursing a cup of coffee tomorrow. He would bring home a wild Mustang, foal and presumably its fiercely protective mother. The thought should have terrified him instead. He felt a calm certainty that this was exactly what he was supposed to do. His phone rang, Natalie's number on the screen. "Owen, you should come back to the clinic." His heart raced. "Is it Comet? Is he worse?" "No, he's fine. It's the mayor." "She's gone." Owen stood gone when not sure she was here at 7 when I checked by 8. "No sign of her. I'll be right there." Owen drove too fast back to town, his mind racing. Had Misty finally given up, returned to her herd, somehow been captured? The questions circled without answers at the clinic. Natalie met him at the door. Her expression troubled. "Any sign of her?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. It's like she vanished." They checked on Comet, who was resting comfortably. Unaware that his mother had disappeared, Owen felt a strange sense of responsibility, of failure. He'd promised to help them both. "I'll look around town," he decided. "Maybe someone saw her." "It's dark, Owen," Natalie cautioned, "and she's a wild horse. She could be miles away by now. I have to try." He drove slowly through Blue River's quiet streets, scanning empty lots and alleys. There was no reason to think Misty would still be in town yet. Something kept him searching near the edge of town. Owen noticed tire tracks turning off toward an abandoned lumber yard. On impulse, he followed them. The yard was dark, its main building a looming shadow against the night sky. He parked and got out, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through darkness, illuminating rusted equipment and stacks of forgotten timber. Sound stopped him. A soft nicker, barely audible. "Misty," he called quietly. Another sound, more urgent. Owen followed it to a dilapidated shed at the back of the property. The door was padlocked, but light leaked through cracks in the wood. Owen pressed his eye to one of the gaps inside. A man was attempting to secure a rope around the neck of a struggling chestnut mare. Misty, without thinking. Owen grabbed a metal bar from the ground and smashed the lock. The door burst open. "Hey!" the man shouted, startled. Owen recognized him immediately, the young ranch hand from Hudson's property. "Let her go," Owen demanded, hefting the metal bar. The ranch hand released the rope and raised his hands. "Easy, man. Just doing my job, your job." "Is horse theft?" Mr. Hudson's orders said it was causing trouble at the vet clinic, needed to be removed. Owen kept the bar raised. "That horse is under Sheriff Pierce's protection, as evidence in an investigation." The ranchman's eyes darted to the door, calculating, "Look, I don't want trouble, just let me go and we'll forget this happened." "I don't think so." Owen pulled out his phone. "We're calling the sheriff." The young man lunged, suddenly shoving Owen hard. He stumbled backward as the ranch hand bolted past him into the darkness. Owen recovered quickly and turned to Misty. She stood trembling, the rope still dangling from her neck. He approached slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice. "It's okay, girl, it's me. I'm going to help you, just like I helped your baby." He reached for the rope. "Let's get this off you," to his amazement. Misty lowered her head, allowing him to remove the rope when he stepped back. She didn't bolt. Instead, she moved closer, her breath warm against his arm. "You remember me?" Owen whispered. "You know I'm trying to help." He pulled out his phone again and dialed Pierce. "Sheriff, I found the mayor. Someone tried to take her, Hudson's man." He explained what had happened. "I'll bring her to my place tonight. Comet can join us tomorrow." When he hung up, Owen faced another challenge: how to transport a wild horse without a trailer. But as he walked toward his truck, Misty followed just as she had the day before. "This is crazy," he muttered. "I'm not the horse whisperer." Yet when he opened the tailgate and gestured, Misty approached cautiously. Then, with a grace that belied her sigh, leapt into the truck bed. She stood steady as Owen secured the gate under the rising. Moonman and Mayor headed home, bound by something neither fully understood. A trust born of desperation, a connection forged in crisis and back in town. Afo slept peacefully, unaware that his brave mother had just placed her life in human hands. For the second time, dawn broke over Owen's property, painting the hills in soft gold. He hadn't slept much, spending most of the night checking on Misty in the barn. The mayor had settled into the largest stall, with surprising calm, accepting water and hay from his hands after only minimal hesitation. Now Owen leaned against the fence, watching her graze in the small paddock. With each passing hour, He found himself more amazed by her behavior. This wasn't just unusual. It was unprecedented. The crunch of tires on gravel announced visitors. Natalie's clinic van pulled up, followed by Sheriff Pierce's cruiser. Owen walked over as they parked. "How's our patient?" he asked as Natalie opened the van's rear doors. "Ready for reunion day," she replied, revealing a travel crate containing the faux comet. Nickered softly when he saw Owen, his ears perking. "Eye forward and Mom," Pierce asked, glancing toward the paddock. "See for yourself," Owen said, gesturing to where Misty grazed at. The sound of voices. She lifted her head, then trotted to the fence, eyes fixed on the van. "She senses him," Natalie said quietly. Owen helped Natalie unload the crate, carrying it between them to the paddock gate. Pierce opened it, and they set the crate down just inside. "Let's give her space," Owen suggested. Stepping back, Misty approached cautiously, nostrils flaring as she caught her baby's scent when Natalie opened the crate door. Comet stumbled out on still wobbly legs. The reunion that followed brought a lump to Owen's throat. Misty circled her foe, sniffing him thoroughly, nickering soft. "Greetings," Comet pressed against her, finding his way to nurse for the first time in days. The three humans watched in silence from beyond the fence, never seen anything like it. Pierce finally said, "Wild mare acting like this. She's extraordinary," Natalie agreed, both in her maternal instinct and her willingness to trust humans. Owen nodded, unable to find words for the emotions swelling in his chest. After losing Caroline, he'd built walls around himself, keeping the world and its potential for more pain at a distance. Now these two wild creatures had somehow slipped past those defenses. "We need to talk about last night," Pierce said, breaking the moment. "The ranch hand." Owen turned reluctantly from the horses. "Jake Morrison works for Hudson. I questioned him this morning. Claims he was acting on orders to remove a nuisance animal from town. Says Hudson told him." "A wild horse was causing problems. That's ridiculous," Natalie interjected. "She was just waiting for her FO. Hudson denies giving the order." Pierce continued. "Says Morrison misunderstood. Convenient." Owen's jaw tightened. "So they get away with it, trapping FO, then trying to kidnap the mother. I don't have proof linking Hudson to the cage." Pice replied, frustration evident in his voice. "And Morrison's story creates reasonable doubt about the mare." "So what now?" Owen asked. "Now, we watch and wait. I've notified federal authorities about possible Mustang harassment. They're sending someone next week. Next week might be too late," Owen muttered after Pierce left. Natalie stayed to check Comet's condition. The FO was improving rapidly, especially now that he was reunited with his mother. "He'll need these antibiotics for another 5 days," she explained, handing Owen a bottle. "Mix it with applesauce, easier to administer." Owen took notes as she detailed care instructions. When they finished, Natalie's expression turned serious. "Owen, are you sure about this? Wild horses aren't pets. Eventually they'll need to return to their herd." "I know." He assured her, "This is temporary, just until they're both strong enough." Natalie studied him for a moment. "It's good to see you investing in something again after Caroline." Owen looked away. "This isn't about that, isn't it? You've spent 3 years hiding from life now. Suddenly you're housing wild Mustangs and confronting ranch hands in dark sheds." She smiled gently. "Seems like something's changed." Before Owen could respond, a truck appeared on the long driveway. Not Pierce returning, but a black pickup he didn't recognize. "Expecting company?" Natalie asked. "No," Owen replied, tensing slightly. The truck parked, and Lawrence Hudson himself stepped out, accompanied by the younger man from the meeting, Randall Norris. They approached with the confidence of men accustomed to getting their way. "Mr. Hayes?" Hudson called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Hope we're not interrupting." Owen moved to meet them, positioning himself between the visitors and the paddock. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hudson?" "Just being neighborly," Hudson replied, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you've taken in some strays." Norris stepped forward, extending his hand. "Randall Norris, Development Partners International." Owen shook it briefly. "What brings a developer to my doorstep? Transparency?" Norris replied smoothly. "Mr. Hudson mentioned your interest in the local wildlife. Thought you might appreciate hearing about our plans directly." "What plans?" Hudson gestured toward the rolling hills beyond Owen's property. "Progress. Mr. Hayes' Blue River's been dying For decades, young people leaving businesses closing our project will change all that a resort. Norris elaborated conference center, golf course, luxury homes, jobs, tax revenue, tourism on protected land. Owen challenged common misconception. Norris countered only portions are federally protected. Mr. Hudson's property is private and he's graciously agreed to sell. What about the Mustang herds? Their migration patterns cross that land. Hudson's smile tightened. The federal authorities will handle relocation. Relocation, Owen repeated flatly. You mean roundup separating established herds, breaking family bonds? It's the approved procedure. Norris insisted completely. Humane Owen's gaze hardened. Is trapping FAs in cages also an approved procedure? Hudson's facade slipped momentarily. I don't know what you're implying. I think you do. Natalie joined them, introducing herself with professional coolness. Your ranch hand tried to take the mayor last night under your orders. He claimed a misunderstanding. Hudson dismissed Morrison tends to improvise. Norris cleared his throat. We actually came to offer a solution, Mr. Hayes. What kind of solution? Compensation, Hudson said bluntly, for your inconvenience. Norris removed an envelope from his jacket. We understand. You've incurred expenses caring for these horses. This should cover those costs plus a generous consideration for your trouble. Owen didn't take the envelope. They're not for sale. The horses aren't yours to sell. Hudson pointed out they're wild animals. Federal property technically, then why offer payment goodwill? Norris said community relations matter to our project. We'd rather have you as a supporter than an obstacle. The threat was thinly veiled. Owen stood his ground. Not interested. Hudson's expression darkened. You might want to reconsider. Small town like this, people talk. Start asking questions about a man who lives alone, takes in wild animals. Might get the wrong idea. Are you threatening me? Owen asked quietly. Advising Hudson corrected this. Project is happening. Hayes Blue River needs it. Don't make yourself the villain trying to stop progress. They left the envelope on the fence post despite Owen's refusal as they drove away. Natalie turned to him, concern in her eyes that was ominous. Owen pocketed the envelope, planning to hand it over to Pierce later. They're worried wouldn't be here otherwise, worried about two horses, about what they represent. Owen replied. Evidence of illegal activity, public sympathy, obstacles to their plans. Behind them, Misty whinnied. Both turned to see her standing alert at the fence, watching the departing truck with ears pinned back. Smart girl, Natalie murmured. Good judge of character. After Natalie left, Owen spent the afternoon observing the horses. Comet grew stronger by the hour, frolicking around his mother with increasing energy. Misty remained vigilant but relaxed, especially when Owen was nearby toward evening. As Owen brought fresh water to the paddock, something remarkable happened. Misty approached the fence where he worked, then extended her neck over the rail. Slowly, deliberately, she touched her muzzle to his shoulder. Owen froze, barely breathing. The gesture wasn't accidental, it was intentional contact from a wild mare. It was extraordinary. Thank you, he whispered, not moving until she backed away on her own terms that night. Owen sat on his porch, scrolling through his phone. The envelope from Norris lay unopened beside him. Curiosity finally won, and he tore it open. Inside was a check for $50. Shows 0. Owen stared at it. Understanding dawning. This wasn't compensation. It was a bribe, or worse, an attempt to create evidence that he'd accepted payment, potentially undermining his credibility if he opposed their plans. A text message from Natalie interrupted his thoughts. Turn on local news. Now Owen hurried inside and switched on the television. The Blue River News showed footage of protesters outside Town Hall. The caption read, Development Project Faces Opposition. The reporter, Carol Martinez, stood before the crowd. A proposed resort development on land bordering federal Mustang territory has sparked controversy after allegations of illegal wild horse trapping. Sources say AFO was found caged on property linked to the development. The camera panned to a familiar face, Sarah Miller, the local schoolteacher, holding a sign reading, Save Our Mustangs. Our wild horses are part of Blue River's heritage. Boo, she told the reporter passionately. They're protected by federal law for a reason. This development threatens their survival. The scene shifted to a statement from Lawrence Hudson, looking indignant. These accusations are baseless. Our project will bring much-needed jobs to Blue River. Anyone claiming otherwise has a personal agenda. Owen turned off the TV. Stunned, how had the story spread so quickly? His phone rang. Sheriff Pierce. You seeing this? Pierce asked without preamble just now. How did it get out? Natalie mentioned it to Sarah Miller when she came into the clinic. Sarah's been fighting the development since they announced it last month. She organized tonight's protest. Oh, inside, Hudson came to see me today, tried to pay me off amount 50. Swordzu 0, a low whistle from Pierce. They're worried. All right, what happens now? Town meeting tomorrow. Council's hearing arguments about the development. It was scheduled weeks ago, but now it'll be a circus after hanging up. Owen walked out to check the horses one last time before bed. Misty and Comet were resting peacefully in the moonlight. The sight calmed him, reinforced his resolve. Whatever Hudson and Norris were planning, these horses deserved protection. As he turned to go, a flash of light from the tree-line caught his attention. Headlights quickly extinguished. Someone was parked on the access road bordering his property. Owen retreated to the house and grabbed his shotgun. Not to use, but as precaution, he moved quietly through the darkness. Toward the spot where he'd seen the lights, a vehicle sat just off the road. Morrison's truck. The ranch hand was crouched at the fence line, binoculars raised, watching the horses. Private property, Owen called. Keeping the shotgun pointed downward, Morrison jumped, dropping the binoculars, just passing by at midnight with surveillance equipment. The young man's face hardened. You're making enemies, Hayes. Hudson won't forget this, neither will. The federal authorities, Owen countered. Mustang harassment carries serious penalties, prove it. Morrison challenged, but his bravado seemed forced. Nobody saw me put that foal in a cage. The admission hung in the night air. Owen kept his voice steady. You just confirmed you were involved. Want to tell me who gave the orders? Morrison. Realizing his mistake, I'm leaving, Sheriff, first. Owen insisted, raising the shotgun slightly. You've got evidence to provide. I'm not going anywhere with you. Morrison spat, backing toward his truck. You think you're saving those horses? You're just delaying the inevitable. Before Owen could respond, a sound froze them both. Hoofbeat ats approaching fast. Misty had somehow escaped the paddock and was charging toward them, a powerful shadow in the moonlight, eyes gleaming with purpose. Morrison panicked, scrambling into his truck. The engine roared to life as he accelerated away, tires spitting gravel. Owen lowered the shotgun, turning to face the mare who now stood before him, nostrils flaring with each breath. She wasn't running wild or bolting in fear. She had come deliberately. To his defense. How did you get out? He whispered. Noticing the open gate she must have somehow manipulated. Misty tossed her head, then turned and trotted back toward the paddock where Comet waited, looking at Owen as if expecting him to follow. Owen checked the gate. The latch had been pushed up, not broken. Somehow this wild mare had figured out how to open it. He secured it properly, making a mental note to add in a second lock tomorrow. As he walked back to the house, a new understanding settled over him. Misty wasn't just cooperative or temporarily tolerant of human presence. She was demonstrating intelligence and decision-making that defied everything he knew about wild horses. She had chosen to protect him just as he had protected her. The town meeting was scheduled for noon the next day. Owen arrived early to find the small town hall already packed. Familiar faces filled the rows. Shopkeepers, farmers, teachers, news cameras lined the back wall. Sarah Miller waved him over. To a saved seat. You're the man of the hour, she said. Everyone's talking about your Mustangs. They're not my Mustangs. Owen corrected automatically. Sarah smiled knowingly. Tell that to the mayor who follows you like a shadow mayor, Frank Wilson called. The meeting to order. Lawrence Hudson and Randall Norris sat at a table to the right, surrounded by men in suits to the left. Environmental representatives and concerned citizens prepared their arguments. Today's meeting will address the proposed Whispering Pines Resort development. Wilson began. We'll hear statements from the developers, then from community members. Norris stood first. His presentation, slick and rehearsed, digital renderings showed luxurious buildings nestled among the hills, promising hundreds of jobs and millions in tax revenue. Blue River has been in economic decline for a decade, he concluded smoothly. This project isn't just an opportunity, it's a lifeline. Hudson followed, emphasizing his deep roots in the community. My family has owned this land for generations. I wouldn't sell if I didn't believe this was best for Blue River's future. Sheriff Pierce, seated near the back, caught Owen's eye and nodded. Slightly, their plan was in motion when the time came for opposing statements. Sarah Miller spoke passionately about environmental impact. Others raised concerns about water usage, traffic, and changing the town's character. Then it was Owen's turn. He walked to the podium, aware of the cameras following him. Public speaking had never been his strength, especially since returning to Blue River as a grieving widower. "Most of you know me," he began quietly, "or knew me before I left town. I came back after losing my wife, looking for quiet. I found it here among the hills and forests where I grew up." He cleared his throat, focusing on the words he'd prepared 3 days ago. "I found a baby Mustang trapped in a cage on protected land. His mother had been watching helplessly, unable to free him when I released him. She did something extraordinary. She trusted me. A wild horse with every reason to fear humans chose to trust. The room had gone silent, all eyes on him. I've since learned that this wasn't an isolated incident. Someone has been systematically removing Mustangs from their protected habitat. Someone with a vested interest in clearing that land." Hudson shifted uncomfortably as Owen continued. "Last night, one of Mr. Hudson's employees admitted to placing that FO in a cage. He was caught surveilling my property where I've been caring for." These horses' murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hudson leaned over to whisper urgently to Norris. Owen removed the envelope from his pocket. "I was also offered $50,000 to forget what I saw, to stay quiet while an entire wild herd is eliminated, to make way for golf courses." Sheriff Pierce stood. "Mr. Hayes has filed formal statements regarding these allegations. Federal wildlife authorities have been notified." The meeting erupted in shouted questions. Mayor Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly. "That's a lie," Hudson bellowed, rising from his seat. "Morrison acted without authorization, if he did anything at all. And the bribe Owen challenged compensation for your expenses." Norris interjected smoothly. "Standard practice when wildlife impacts private citizens. Nothing improper." Pierce approached the front. "We have evidence suggesting otherwise. Jake Morrison has provided a statement implicating both of you in a systematic effort to remove protected wildlife." Owen hadn't expected this development. Pierce had been busy. "This is ridiculous." Hudson sputtered. "You can't possibly believe I believe the evidence." Pierce replied calmly, "And so will the federal prosecutor." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Mayor Wilson eventually called a recess, promising to reconvene. When cooler heads prevail outside, Owen found himself surrounded by reporters and supporters. He answered questions briefly before extricating himself to speak with Pierce. "Morrison confessed?" he asked quietly. Pierce nodded. "This morning after your encounter, he got nervous, decided to protect himself by talking first. He's been trapping Mustangs for months under Hudson's orders. Will it be enough to delay the development?" "Absolutely, to put Hudson away. We'll see men like that have expensive lawyers." Owen drove home with mixed feelings. The immediate threat to the Mustangs might be paused, but Hudson wouldn't give up his plans easily, and the attention meant Owen's quiet life had been shattered at his property. He was surprised to find Natalie's van parked near the barn. She emerged as he pulled up. "Heard what happened at the meeting?" she said. "You're all over the local news." Owen grimaced. "Not my intention." "No, but it's what those horses needed." She nodded toward the paddock. "I stopped by to check on Comet. His recovery is remarkable." They walked to the fence together. Comet galloped playfully around his mother. His movements strong and coordinated, almost no trace of his earlier weakness. "He's thriving." Owen agreed. "They both are." Natalie observed, though. "Misty still refuses to let anyone but you touch her," as if hearing her name. The mayor looked up, then trotted to the fence where Owen stood. Without hesitation, she extended her neck, touching her muzzle to his outstretched hand. "It's extraordinary," Natalie murmured. "In my entire career, I've never seen a wild Mustang bond with a human like this, especially an adult mare with a f." Owen stroked Misty's forehead gently. "It's like she's trying to tell me something." "Maybe she is," Natalie replied thoughtfully. "Horses communicate differently than we do. They read intention, emotion, body language, whatever she sees in you. She's decided you're trustworthy." After Natalie left, Owen opened the paddock gate, entering with a lead rope, not to capture, but to offer Misty, watched him approach but didn't retreat. Comet, curious as always, came over to investigate. "You two are causing quite a stir," Owen told them, feeling slightly foolish talking to horses, yet compelled to do so. "Half the town thinks I'm a hero, the other half thinks I'm a neo-terrorist halting progress." Misty nickered softly, stepping closer. Owen held out the rope, curious to his amazement. She lowered her head, allowing him to slip it over her neck, not tight, not restraining, more like a connection between them. "A choice, who are you?" he whispered, stroking her neck. "What are you trying to show me?" The moment was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching too fast. Owen removed the rope and exited the paddock. Securing the gate behind him, a black SUV screeched to a halt in his driveway. Lawrence Hudson stepped out, his face contorted with rage. "You've gone too far, Hayes," he shouted, storming toward Owen, turning Morrison against me, making accusations in public. Owen stood his ground. "I didn't turn anyone. Your man confessed on his own after you threatened him with a shotgun after he admitted to caging a foe on your orders," Owen countered. The truth was coming out one way or another. Hudson stepped closer, jabbing a finger at Owen's chest. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This development is worth millions. You think I'll let some grief-stricken photographer with a horse fetish stand in my way?" Owen noticed movement behind Hudson. Misty had approached the fence, watching intently, ears forward. "You might want to step back," Owen warned quietly. "Or what?" Hudson sneered. "You'll set your wild horse on me. That animal belongs in a processing plant, not playing pet on your little hobby farm." The threat toward Misty pushed Owen's restraint to its limit. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Get off my property." Hudson didn't budge. "This isn't over." Not by a long shot behind them. Misty had somehow once again opened the gate. She moved silently across the yard, approaching Hudson from behind. Owen saw her, but gave no indication, keeping Hudson's attention on him. "The federal authorities arrive tomorrow," Owen said calmly. "I suggest you have your lawyer ready." "You smug bastard," Hudson snarled, raising his hand as if to strike. That's when Misty acted with deliberate precision. She positioned herself between Owen and Hudson, using her body as a shield. She didn't charge, didn't attack. She simply stood, a living barrier. Her eyes fixed on Hudson with unmistakable warning. Hudson stumbled backward, fear replacing anger. "Control your animal." "She's not my animal," Owen replied evenly. "She's making her own choice, just like she did when she followed me to town, just like she did when she came to my defense against Morrison." Misty took one step toward Hudson, who retreated further. The powerful mayor's message was clear. "Threat detected, protector engaged." "You're insane," Hudson gasped, backing toward his vehicle. "Both of you." Owen placed a hand on Misty's neck, the touch calming them both. "No, Mr. Hudson, we're just showing you something you don't understand. Loyalty freely given, not forced or bought." After Hudson sped away, Owen led Misty back to the paddock. The gate mechanism was simple, a sliding latch she'd managed to push up with her muzzle. He'd need something more complex if he wanted to keep her contained. But as he watched her reunite with Comet, Owen wondered if containment was really necessary. Misty had opportunities to leave, to take her foe and return to the wild. Instead, she chose to stay. More than that, she chose to protect him. As the sun set over the Kentucky hills, Owen sat on the fence, rail, watching mother and foe graze peacefully. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight of loneliness had lifted these wild horses. Especially Misty had awakened. Something he thought had died with Caroline: connection, purpose, the courage. To stand for something tomorrow would bring federal investigators more questions, perhaps legal battles with Hudson and his developers. But tonight, in this moment, Owen Hayes had found an unexpected peace alongside the most unlikely of allies, a wild Mustang who had somehow recognized in him a kindred spirit. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table where Owen sat with Maria Hernandez, the federal wildlife officer who had arrived from Louisville at dawn, dark-haired and serious. She reviewed his statement with methodical precision. "Let me understand this clearly," she said, looking up from her notes. "You believe Lawrence Hudson orchestrated the illegal capture of Mustangs to clear land for development?" Owen nodded his ranch hand. "Morrison admitted to placing the FO in that cage. Sheriff Pierce has his statement, and the mother horse has demonstrated unusual protective behavior toward you. Yes, she's unlike any wild Mustang I've encountered." Maria glanced out the window toward the paddock where Misty and Comet grazed peacefully. "I'd like to observe them." They walked across the yard, stopping at a distance that wouldn't disturb the horses. Maria raised her binoculars, studying the mare's movements. "Beautiful specimen," she murmured. Strong confirmation, excellent condition despite recent stress. She's special, Owen said simply. Maria lowered the binoculars. Mr. Hayes, I've worked with wild horse populations for 12 years. I've seen hundreds of Mustangs in various situations. What you're describing, a wild mare voluntarily following a human protecting him. It's exceptional. But you don't believe me. I believe you believe it, she replied carefully. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Owen understood. Her skepticism, he'd have felt the same a week ago. Watch this, he said. Walking toward the paddock, Misty noticed his approach immediately. She raised her head, ears forward, then trotted to meet him at the fence. Comet followed his movements, now strong and coordinated, almost no trace of his earlier weakness. Owen opened the gate and entered. Maria tensed visibly but stayed where she was, observing what happened next. Made her gasp audibly. Misty approached Owen directly, lowering her head in greeting. He stroked her neck gently, and she leaned into his. Touch. Comet pranced around them, playfully, completely at ease. That's unusual, Maria admitted, approaching the fence cautiously as she drew near. Misty's demeanor changed, not aggressive, but wary, positioning herself slightly between Owen and the newcomer. She's protective of you, Maria noted with evident surprise. Yes, may I? Enter. Owen nodded slowly. Maria opened the gate with practiced ease and stepped inside. Misty watched intently but didn't retreat. Comet, curious as always, approached the new human, sniffing cautiously. The foe shows normal investigative behavior, Maria observed, but the mare. She shook her head in wonder. She's making conscious choices about whom to trust. They spent the next hour documenting Misty's behavior. Maria took photographs, made notes, and asked Owen detailed questions about every interaction. Since the rescue, this could be significant for our understanding of Mustang cognition, she said finally. Would you be willing to participate in a behavioral study? Before Owen could answer, Sheriff Pierce's cruiser pulled into the driveway, followed by another official vehicle. That's Agent Walker from the FBI. Maria explained. We've been collaborating on this case. Owen felt his stomach tighten. The involvement of federal law enforcement confirmed the seriousness of Hudson's actions. Pierce approached first, his expression grim. Hudson's lawyers are working overtime, trying to discredit Morrison's testimony, claiming entrapment. Will it work? Owen asked. Doubtful. We've got too much evidence, but they're pulling political strings. The development has supporters. In high places, Agent Walker, a tall man with a precisely trimmed beard, nodded to Owen. Mr. Hayes, your documentation of the captured FO has been extremely helpful. What happens next? Owen asked. We've obtained warrants to search Hudson's property and offices. His associate Norris has financial connections. We're investigating. This appears to be part of a larger pattern of environmental violations. Maria rejoined the conversation. And the Mustangs? What about their protected status? That's where it gets complicated. Walker admitted the development proposal includes a provision to redraw the boundaries of the protected habitat. It's technically legal with the right approvals, which they were trying to fast-track by removing the horses first, Pice added. Owen looked back at Misty and Comet, a protective instinct rising in his chest. What does this mean? For them, Maria's expression softened. For now, nothing changes. You've been designated as a temporary rehabilitation facility. Once the FO is fully recovered, we should discuss reintroduction to the wild. The thought created an unexpected ache in Owen's chest. He'd known this arrangement was temporary, yet the prospect of Misty and Comet leaving already felt like an impending loss. After the officials departed, Owen spent the afternoon in his dark room developing photographs he'd taken of the horses. Over the past days, the images revealed subtle details he hadn't fully appreciated in the moment. The intelligence in Misty's eyes, the trusting tilt of her head, the protective stance she took beside her. A knock at the door interrupted his work. He opened it to find Sarah Miller, the schoolteacher who had organized the town meeting protest. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, brushing a strand of orb and hair from her face. Thought you might want to see today's paper. She handed him the Blue River Gazette. The headline read, FBI investigates local developer over Mustang scandal. You're making quite an impact, Sarah said, smiling. The whole town's talking about the photographer and his miracle horses, Owen returned. The paper. They're not miracle horses, just smart ones. Can I see them? The children in my class have been asking questions. I'd love to have first-hand observations to share. Owen hesitated. Too many visitors might stress the horses, but education was important, especially for the next generation who would be responsible for protecting these wild creatures. Briefly he agreed, and from a distance they walked to the paddock together. Misty watched their approach with her usual alertness while Comet nursed contentedly. "She's magnificent," Sarah whispered, careful not to startle them. "I've seen the wild herds from afar, but never this close. She's chosen to stay." Owen explained, "She could leave any time. The gates aren't that secure. Why would she stay? The wild is their natural habitat." Owen considered this safety, perhaps food shelter, or maybe. He paused, feeling foolish about his next thought. Maybe what? Maybe connection. These are herd animals. They form bonds, have social structures. She's formed some kind of bond with me. Sarah studied him thoughtfully. People form unexpected bonds too, especially after loss. Owen shifted uncomfortably, sensing the conversation turning personal. Sarah picked up on his discomfort and changed the subject. "Hudson's not giving up, he was at the diner this morning, telling anyone who'd listen that the development means progress, that you're standing in the way of Blue River's future. I'm just trying to protect those horses. I know that, but this town has been struggling, businesses closing, young people leaving. Some folks are desperate enough to believe Hudson's promises," as if sensing the tension in their conversation. Misty approached the fence, her eyes fixed on Owen with that uncanny perception he'd come to recognize. "See that?" Sarah whispered. "It's like she's checking on you." Owen nodded. "She does that, seems to pick up on emotions." Remarkable. After Sarah left, Owen sat on the porch steps processing their conversation. She was right about the town's struggles. Blue River had been declining for years. Caroline had seen it too, had been working on community revitalization before the accident. The thought of his late wife didn't bring the usual sharp pain. Instead, it carried a bittersweet warmth. Caroline would have loved. These horses would have been the first to stand against Hudson's schemes. A vehicle approaching on the main road caught his attention. A large truck towing a horse trailer. It slowed as it passed his property, then continued on. Owen felt a prickle of unease, just someone interested in the horses that had become local celebrities, or something more sinister. That night, Owen slept fitfully, waking to check on the horses twice. The second time at around 3 a.m. He noticed lights in the distance moving along the ridge that bordered Hudson's property. Too steady for flashlights, too low for vehicles. Possibly ATV headlamps. He pulled on boots and a jacket, grabbed his phone and a powerful flashlight, and headed toward the barn. Misty was already alert, standing at the paddock fence facing the distant lights. Comet slept peacefully behind her. "You see them too?" Owen murmured. The mayor nickered softly, as if confirming his suspicion. Owen decided against investigating alone in the dark. Instead, he called Pierce Sheriff. "It's Owen Hayes. There's activity on the ridge bordering Hudson's land. ATVs, I think." Pierce's voice was instantly alert despite the hour stay put. "I'll send a patrol car." 20 minutes later, headlights appeared on Owen's driveway. Not a patrol car. Sheriff Pierce himself, along with a deputy, saw the lights from town, Pierce explained, joining Owen at the fence. "They're gone now. What would they be doing up there at this hour?" "Nothing good, my guess. Moving equipment before the federal search warrants are executed." Owen gestured to Misty, still standing vigilant. She noticed them first. Pierce studied the mayor with newfound respect. "Some guard dog you've got there." "She's been uneasy all evening, pacing, watching the ridge." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Animals sense things we miss." "Maria Hernandez called me earlier, very impressed with your mayor's behavior." "She's not my mayor," Owen corrected automatically. Pierce just smiled. "Tell her that." After the sheriff left, Owen couldn't bring himself to return to bed. Instead, he sat on an overturned bucket in the barn, watching as Misty finally relaxed enough to lie down beside her. The simple intimacy of the scene touched something deep within him. "What am I going to do when you leave?" he whispered into the darkness. Dawn was breaking. When Owen finally dozed off, still sitting in the barn, he woke to the sensation of warm breath on his face. Opening his eyes, he found himself inches from Misty's muzzle. The mayor had approached while he slept, was now examining him with gentle curiosity. "Good morning to you too," he said softly. Sharp crack from the direction of the ridge jolted them both. Misty's head came up, ears swiveling toward. The sound, another crack, unmistakably gunfire. Owen stood quickly pulling out his phone before he could dial. The sound of engines roared to life heading away from the ridge. He hurried to the fence line trying to see what was happening in the distance. A cloud of dust rose as several ATVs sped toward Hudson's property from the ridge. A different movement caught his eye. Horses, several of them running in panic. Music, wild Mustangs, part of Misty's herd. Owen dialed Pierce again, reporting what he'd seen. Then he faced a decision. Those horses were heading straight for a new barbed wire fence Hudson had installed along the property line, invisible in the morning mist. In their panic, they might run right into it without fully considering the consequences. Owen opened the paddock gate. Misty watched him intently. "I need your help," he told her, feeling ridiculous, yet compelled. "Your family's in danger." As if understanding, Misty trotted through the open gate. Comet attempted to follow, but Owen blocked his path. "Gently, not you, little one, stay safe." He secured the gate, then turned to Misty, who waited several yards away, looking back at him expectantly. "Go on," he encouraged, pointing toward the ridge. "They need you more than we do." For a moment, the mare stood motionless, caught between her foe and herd. Then she made a decision that stole Owen's breath. Instead of running toward the distant horses, she moved to Owen's side, nudging his arm as if urging him to mount. "You want me to come with you?" Misty poured the ground once decisively. Owen had ridden horses all his life, but never bareback and never a wild Mustang, yet something in her demeanor conveyed absolute certainty. This was her choice. With careful movements, he placed his hands on her back, then hoisted himself up. Misty stood perfectly still until he was seated, then without any guidance from him began trotting toward the ridge, where the Mustangs were still running in confusion. The sensation was unlike any riding experience Owen had known. Misty moved with fluid grace, her body communicating each intention before she executed it. He balanced, naturally adapting to her movements, as if they'd practiced for years. As they crested the smaller hills leading to the ridge, they gained a clearer view of the situation. About a dozen Mustangs, a mixed group of mares, yearlings, and one stallion were being driven toward the fence line by two men on ATVs. The men were firing shots into the air, deliberately panicking the horses. Misty let out a piercing whinny that carried across the valley. The stallion responded immediately, changing direction. The rest of the herd followed, turning away from the fence and toward Misty and Owen. The men on ATVs, suddenly noticing Owen, cut their engines. One reached for what looked like a rifle on the back of his vehicle. "Federal protected land," Owen shouted, his voice carrying in the morning air. "Wildlife officers are on their way." It was a bluff, but an effective one. The men exchanged words, then restarted their engines and sped away toward Hudson's property. The wild herd approached cautiously, led by the stallion, a powerful buckskin with a black man. He snorted, challenging Misty, clearly confused by the human on her back. Misty responded with a series of soft vocalizations that Owen couldn't interpret. The stallion circled them, nostrils flaring, while the rest of the herd watched from a safe distance. Whatever communication passed between the horses seemed to resolve the tension. The stallion tossed his head, then turned toward safer ground away from the fence line. The herd followed, with Misty and Owen bringing up the rear. They proceeded this way for nearly a mile, guiding the Mustangs away from Hudson's property, toward the heart of the protected range. Only when the herd had reached a small valley with a natural spring did Misty stop. Owen slid from her back, his legs shaky from the unexpected ride. The wild horses kept their distance from him, but seemed to accept Misty's presence despite her human companion. "You saved them," Owen told her, voice thick with emotion. "You knew exactly what to do." Misty turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the rising sun. For a long moment, they stood together, human and horse connected by something beyond explanation. Then she did something that would forever change how Owen understood these magnificent creatures. She lowered her head and pressed her forehead gently against his chest, a gesture of absolute trust and connection. The stallion called from the valley, an impatient summons. Misty lifted her head, looking toward her, then back at Owen. He understood with painful clarity this was a goodbye. "Go on," he whispered, his throat tight. "Be with your family. Comet will be waiting when you're ready." Misty hesitated, then turned and trotted toward the herd. The stallion greeted her with cautious acceptance, and the other men moved to welcome her back among them. Owen watched until they disappeared over the next ridge, then began the long walk back to his property. His mind raced with questions. Would she return for Comet? Would she bring the herd to his land, or was this simply the natural conclusion? A wild horse returning to freedom once her foe was safe. The sound of vehicles interrupted his thoughts. Coming up the trail were Sheriff Pierce's cruiser and Maria Hernandez's SUV. They stopped beside him, both looking surprised to find him on foot miles from his home. "Are you all right?" Maria asked. Stepping out, "We got reports of gunfire." Owen explained what had happened. Hudson's men driving the wild horses, Misty's intervention, the rescue of the herd. "She let you ride her?" Maria asked incredulously. "A wild Mustang, it was her idea." Owen replied, knowing how it sounded. "She could have gone alone, but she invited me, Pierce." And Maria exchanged glances, and now she's rejoined her. Pierce concluded. Yes, the word felt hollow in Owen's mouth. "What about the FO?" Maria asked, still at my property safe in the paddock she left him behind. Maria's surprise was evident. That contradicts typical Mustang behavior. The FO should be her priority. Owen had been wondering the same thing. I think she knows he's safe with me, that she can come back for him." The conviction in his voice must have been persuasive, because neither challenged his interpretation. "We'll need documented statements." "About Hudson's men," Pierce said. Changing the subject, "This harassment of protected wildlife strengthens the federal case." Owen nodded, but his thoughts remained with Misty and the choice she had made as they drove him back to his property. He gazed at the distant hills where the herd had disappeared, wondering if he would ever see her again at the house. Comet greeted him with excited whinnies, searching behind Owen for his mother. The foal's confusion at Misty's absence broke Owen's heart. "She'll be back," he promised, stroking the young horse's neck. "She wouldn't leave you forever," but as the day progressed with no sign of the mare, doubt crept in. Had he misunderstood? Had Misty simply seized an opportunity to return to her natural life? Maternal instincts overridden by the call of the herd by sunset? Owen sat on the porch steps watching Comet pace the paddock. Occasionally calling for his mother, the foe's distress mirrored Owen's own sense of loss. "I'm sorry, buddy," he said softly. I understood her as darkness fell." Owen brought extra hay to Comet's stall, trying to comfort the anxious foe. He checked all gates and fences, then retreated to the house emotionally exhausted. He was washing dishes when a sound stopped him, a distinctive nicker he'd come to recognize. Rushing to the window, Owen peered into the darkness. There, illuminated by the yard light, stood Misty, and behind her, watching cautiously from the shadows, was the entire wild herd. Owen stood motionless at the window, hardly daring to breathe. The yard light illuminated an extraordinary scene. Misty, standing proudly at his fence line, and behind her, the wild Mustang herd she had left with hours earlier. The powerful buckskin stallion paced nervously at the edge of the darkness, while mares and yearlings clustered together watching the house, wearily. "Impossible," Owen whispered. He moved slowly to the door, stepping outside with deliberate care. Misty nickered in greeting, trotting to meet him at the steps behind her. Comet whinnied excitedly from the paddock, recognizing his mother's return. Owen approached Misty with reverence, placing a gentle hand on her neck. "You came back," he said softly, "and you brought friends." The mare leaned into his touch momentarily, then turned her head toward the herd as if making introductions. The stallion snorted, pouring the ground but not retreating. Owen struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. Wild Mustangs didn't visit human homesteads voluntarily. Yet here stood nearly 20 wild horses, seemingly at Misty's invitation, moving carefully. Owen opened the paddock gate. Comet bolted out immediately, rushing to his mother's side. Their reunion was tender. Nuzzling, soft nickering, Misty examining her foe thoroughly, as if checking that he remained unharmed. Then, to Owen's continued amazement, Misty guided Comet toward the wild herd. The stallion approached, cautiously sniffing, the young horse accepting his presence one by one. Other mares came forward, greeting the foe in their own ways. "She's introducing him to the herd," Owen realized aloud. For over an hour, Owen sat on the porch steps witnessing this unprecedented integration. The wild horses gradually relaxed, some even grazing on his land while maintaining a respectful distance from the house. Only Misty and Comet moved freely between the human and equines. Eventually, Owen went inside to call those who needed to see this miracle: Sheriff Pierce, Maria Hernandez, and Natalie Wilson, all promised to come at first light, skepticism evident in their voices. Despite Owen's insistence, he spent a restless night checking the window every hour, afraid the herd might disappear as mysteriously as they had arrived. But morning found them still there, some dozing in the early light, others grazing peacefully. Across his property, Maria Hernandez arrived first, her government SUV, crawling slowly up the drive to avoid startling the horses. She stepped out, binoculars already raised. "My God," she breathed. "You weren't exaggerating?" The stallion noticed her, immediately alerting the herd with a short call. They grouped together, but didn't flee, unusual behavior that Maria noted with professional interest. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" Owen asked as she joined him at a respectful distance from the horses. "Never," she admitted. "Wild herds avoid human settlements instinctively. This defies everything we understand about Mustang behavior." Natalie and Sheriff Pierce arrived minutes apart, both rendered speechless by the sight the four humans gathered on Owen's porch, watching as the morning unfolded with surreal, normally wild Mustangs grazing on a photographer's lawn, a formerly captive foe playing among them. "It's her," Natalie said, finally pointing to Misty. "She's the link. Somehow she's communicated to them that this place is safe. Or this person," Maria suggested, glancing at Owen. "Perhaps it's not the location, but the human she trusts." Pierce shook his head in wonder. "Either way, this changes everything. These horses are making a choice, a conscious decision to engage with humans differently." "Not all humans," Owen corrected. "Just," he trailed off, uncomfortable claiming any special connection. "Just you," Natalie finished for him, "the man who saved her baby." As they spoke, Misty separated from the herd, approaching the porch with Comet frolicking behind her. She stopped a few feet away, regarding the humans with those intelligent eyes that had captivated Owen. "From the beginning, I'd like to document this," Maria said quietly. "With your permission, this could revolutionize our understanding of wild horse cognition and social structures." Owen nodded, his attention still fixed on Misty. "Something tells me she planned this. Bringing the herd here wasn't an accident." "What do you mean?" Pierce asked. "Hudson's men were hearing them toward that barbed wire fence. It was a trap. By bringing them here, she's protecting them." Maria considered this, seeking sanctuary that would imply a level of abstract thinking. "We haven't attributed to Equine watch her," Owen said simply. "She understands more than we realize." The morning's peaceful scene was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Not just one, but several engines growing louder as they neared Owen's property. Misty's ears swiveled toward the sound. Her body tensing, the stallion called a warning gathering. The herd closer together. "That's